I'm really bummed out that I'm making this video. I wish it didn't come to this. I wish I lived in a world where Final Fantasy VII Remake was a game that did justice to the storyline of the original. But instead, Square Enix made a bunch of absolutely asinine changes to the plot, which ruined a lot of the experience for me. They also packed it full to the brim with filler content that does nothing to advance the plot, expand the world, or do anything except bloat the runtime of this game. I wonder if many other OG Final Fantasy VII fans feel the same way as I do, because apparently the review outlets do not. Looking at the reviews for this game has been absolutely baffling for me. Pretty much every major outlet, from GameSpot to IGN, has showered this game with praise and the highest of scores. It's pretty much 9s and 10s all across the board, with a few 8s and 8.5s sprinkled in for good measure. Some even go so far as to call the game a masterpiece. It got me thinking, did I really play the same game as the journalists? Because the Final Fantasy VII Remake I played was a good game with a fucked story, and it was nowhere near a masterpiece. Maybe I'm in an alternate timeline where Square Enix cannibalized one of the greatest video game stories of all time. And maybe, just maybe, the game reviewers live in a world upheld by the Whispers, where the tendrils of destiny stayed the course of the original plot's high standards of storytelling. Don't get me wrong, Square Enix did a lot of things right with Final Fantasy VII Remake, but the writing is not among them. This video is going to focus on the new content, side quests, and story changes in Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'll be going over issues with the game's story, structure, character development, and side content. There will be spoilers throughout this entire video, both for the original 1997 version of Final Fantasy VII and the 2020 remake. If you haven't played both these games and are concerned about spoilers, consider yourself duly warned. There will not be another disclaimer. Now for a bit of context on my perspective coming into this game. I'm an OG Final Fantasy VII fan. I played it for the first time in 1997 when I was 8 years old. It was a transformative experience in gaming for me. I had never played anything like it before, and I was immediately engaged with the characters, the plot, the world, the music, and the combat. I loved all of it. I've played the original FF7 from start to finish about a dozen times since then, most recently back in March as I hyped myself up for the release of Remake. And I was super excited for Final Fantasy VII Remake. So excited, I bought a PlayStation 4 just to play this game, and Ghost of Tsushima. Yeah, I bought a PS4 in the last year of this console generation, when it will almost certainly drop in price when the PS5 is released in holiday season 2020. That's how much I love Final Fantasy VII. So it absolutely kills me that I don't like the remake. I really wanted to love it. I really thought I would love it. But from a story standpoint, it just doesn't do justice to the original game. Square Enix made key changes to the plot that really undercut some of the most dramatic and best moments from the original, and it's a damn shame. Before I go absolutely ham on this game's story and new content, let me acknowledge some of the things that Square Enix did right with the remake. And they did a lot right. I can understand the praise for this title based on a lot of these things. I still don't agree with calling it a masterpiece, but I can at least maybe see where they're coming from. For starters, graphics and art style. This game looks undeniably incredible. The lighting, the character models, the set pieces. It all comes together to bring this world to life in a way that simply wasn't possible back in 1997. Next, we have the combat systems. The developers did an excellent job of blending modern real-time combat with the tactical turn-based systems of the original game. You've got the tactical pause menu, which allows you to issue commands to companions as well as use magic and items. They also included limit breaks and summons in a satisfying way. The most fun part of the original game's combat were the strategic elements, balancing attacks, magic and summons, healing and item usage to get the advantage over your enemies. And those elements of strategy are active here as well, while still allowing you real-time control of Cloud and his companions, who you can also switch to and control directly on the fly. They also did a great job with enemy design and boss battles. If you've played the original, you'll likely recognize a lot of the enemies from the 1997 game. It was really cool to see faithful designs of Gorgers, Drakes, and those Panther dog things, the Shinra soldier uniforms, and many others. The boss battles are also the creme de la creme of Remake. Final Fantasy VII had some epic boss battles that are made even more bombastic in the remake. Standouts include Airbuster, Reno and Rude, and the Hell House fight. That last one wasn't exactly a boss in the original game, but a tough enemy for low-level characters that you might encounter 1 to 2 hours into your playthrough. Also, the music. The music, man. Need I say more? Just listen to this shit. Finally, the voice acting. It's a mixed bag. It's pretty good most of the time. There are some standout performances like Aerith and Tifa.
Aerith. It's Aerith. And you are?
Cloud.
Nice to meet you again.
I tried to keep it alive as long as I could. But now, it's dead and buried. Like the bar, our home, and everything else.
Cloud is pretty good too. The acting is very flat and emotionless for him, but that's true to his character, so I'm alright with it. And I can't decide whether Barret is great or cringy and over the top.
New plan. Y'all take Aerith and get the hell out of here. Me, I'm gonna go bust some Shinra heads.
I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
What?
I go back and forth on that one. But all in all, I think they did a good job at casting voice actors for these iconic characters. So they did a lot right with this game. Here's the thing though. Final Fantasy VII is a story-driven game. It's one of the most iconic video game stories of all time. The story is one of the few things that didn't need updating for the remake. It's not a perfect story by any means. There are some plot holes and ridiculous moments. But overall, it was a high-stakes, sci-fi, fantasy drama with a gripping plot, characters you grew to love, and equally compelling villains. It also has one of the most satisfying and epic endings for any video game I've ever played. The rewrites and new content that Square Enix created for this remake undercut a lot of the emotional impact in key moments during the story. They also add a lot of moments that are so ridiculous and unbelievable. So let's dive in and start dissecting the problems with Final Fantasy VII Remake's story and new content. There are two core challenges with rewriting any established story. One, you run the risk of introducing new plot holes that weren't there before. For instance, Don Corneo not recognizing Aerith and Cloud, even though they fought in his arena and used their real names.
You look kind of familiar. We haven't met before, have we?
Or Rufus departing for Shinra HQ prior to his father's death, even though his father dying was the whole reason he showed up in the original game. And if Avalanche has a helicopter, why the fuck does Cloud need Don Corneo and Leslie to get to Shinra HQ? The second problem is, if the quality of the writing doesn't match the original work, it really sticks out in a bad way. Some examples of this are the fate of Wedge's character, most of the new side quests, big parts of the Shinra HQ chapters, and the ending. But I'm getting ahead of myself. A bigger problem for Final Fantasy VII Remake than simply rewriting the plot is the core design and scope of the game. The original story was about 30 hours in length and broke down neatly into 3 acts. Act 1 starts in Midgar and introduces the conflict between Shinra and Avalanche. It also introduces Sephiroth as the main antagonist. Cloud and gang pursue Sephiroth across the world to the Temple of the Ancients and eventually the Forgotten City. The act ends with Aerith's death at the hands of Sephiroth. Act 2 begins with the gang catching up with Sephiroth and confronting him in the Northern Crater. Cloud hands over the black materia and is separated from the group. Sephiroth summons a meteor to rain down towards the planet and erects a barrier over the Northern Crater. Tifa finds Cloud incapacitated in Midgar, and eventually they both fall into the life stream where Cloud explores his memories and reconciles his true identity. Act 2 closes with the gang pursuing 3 huge materia, which they will use to summon the power of Holy before confronting Sephiroth. Act 3 is the shortest act and involves tying up any loose ends before the gang heads down into the Northern Crater to fight against Sephiroth and Jenova. Cloud defeats and kills Sephiroth, but the gang cannot stop the meteor. But they are saved by the life stream, which prevents Meteor from crashing into the planet. This cuts to the final cinematic of Red 13 running with his children to take a look at the ruins of Midgar as the sound of human children laughing is heard and the screen cuts to black. You see, Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't cover the full story of the original game. In fact, it only covers the opening part of Act 1, which takes place in Midgar. This gameplay sequence was only about 5 hours in the original. To me, if you were going to break up the story into multiple games, it would have made the most sense to make it a trilogy, one for each act of the story, maybe adjusting some things slightly since Act 3 is basically just the final journey to fight and defeat Sephiroth. But no, instead, they took the first 5 hours of the game and said, yeah, let's make this 30 to 40 hours. The first 5 hours of the game into 30 to 40 hours of content. You can already see how this creates huge problems, right? The most obvious one is in story pacing, but it also impacts core gameplay elements like character leveling, loot drops, and combat scaling. For instance, it's likely you'll reach level 35 or higher by the end of the game. So will you continue scaling up to level 200, 300, or 400 by the end of the franchise? Will you be able to import your character across releases? Will gameplay systems be consistent throughout the series, or will they change? Also, how long is it going to take for the whole series to be completed and released? And how many goddamn games are there going to be in this series? It seems like Square Enix doesn't even know the answer to this. Games journalist Jason Schreier tweeted in 2019, just asked Yoshinori Kitase how many games are going to be in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. He said, can't say yet, because we don't know ourselves. Over a year later, we still don't have any official word from Square Enix on the planned length of the remake series. It's possible Square Enix is just playing close to the vest, and that they do have a roadmap for the series, but just don't want to share it publicly yet. But I don't think so. I think it's more likely that the developers haven't thought past the first game, and they don't really know where they are planning to take the story. Given how convoluted a lot of the writing is in Final Fantasy VII Remake, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence that Square can't answer basic questions like, how many games are you planning to make? I think a lot of this comes down to money, too.
He must open his eyes to the truth, that his corporate masters are profiting from the planet's pain.
If Square Enix can make a lot of money on Final Fantasy VII Remake, then why not stretch the franchise out for as long as possible, even if the storytelling suffers a drop in quality? I mean, nothing like that has ever happened with beloved franchises like The Simpsons, Game of Thrones, The Last of Us, Star Wars, or anything like that. How do you stretch a 5-hour gameplay segment into a 30 to 40-hour game? This is what Square Enix sought to achieve with Final Fantasy VII Remake. There are 2 methods to pull this off. 1, stretch out existing missions to make them longer. The best example of this is the Sector 5 reactor mission. In the original game, you could complete this mission in about 25 minutes. You take the train, avoid security, navigate the subway tunnels, enter the reactor, plant the bombs, get caught by Shinra, and finally defeat Airbuster. Bing bang boom, 25 minutes later, you're chilling with Aerith in a bed of flowers. In Remake, this mission is stretched out over 3 full chapters that takes almost 3 hours to complete. The most obvious section of padding is Chapter 6, where Cloud, Tifa, and Barret have to navigate a maze of catwalks and turn off 4 sun lamps. All this so they can direct power to a freight elevator that they use to enter the reactor. This section took me a full hour to complete, and literally nothing happens from a story standpoint. Maybe some folks enjoyed this mission, but for me it was painfully boring. I just wanted to get on with the story, but instead I needed to complete a series of tedious tasks before I could progress.
Error. Insufficient power.
You're kidding me.
Again, this problem flows directly from the choice to make an entire game around the intro to Act 1. There isn't enough story content in that section of the original game to prop up a 30-hour experience. So the developers just ended up adding a lot of filler, like the Sun Lamps chapter, to make the game longer. The second method for expanding the game is by adding new story content and side missions. Examples of this include Jesse's personal mission in Chapter 4, including a boss battle with the new character Roche, the new characters and missions in Wall Market, and all the new side quests added in the Midgar slums. In my opinion, this is the better approach to extending the gameplay because in theory, you can create more depth or story with new characters and quests. But the results are mixed at best in FF7 Remake. So let's take a look at Remake's new NPCs and side quests. Final Fantasy VII Remake added a lot of new characters, particularly in the Midgar slums and Wall Market. There are a few memorable ones, but unfortunately the vast majority of these characters are bland and one-dimensional. Let's take a look at this new cast of characters. First we have Marl, the slumlord grandma, who is overprotective of Tifa and doesn't really collect rent from any of her tenants, so we're left wondering how she makes a living. There's Weimer, the monotone kill quest dispenser. Every time we talk to Weimer, he's always rambling about some menacing monsters that only we can take care of.
Took care of the dog, did you?
Whew. Next we have Chadwick, a character who feels like a lobotomized Persona 5 scrub. Another monotone side quest dispenser, totally devoid of personality. We also have a coterie of orphaned children roaming the slums and patrolling gangs. You won't remember any of their names and probably won't give a flying fuck about anything they have to say. I know I certainly didn't. Then we've got Damon, the pushy journalist from a Shinra-sponsored newspaper. He's always looking for a scoop, but you won't catch him working too hard to get it. We've also got the Cringe Bandits. If you come round their neighborhood, they'll attempt to relieve you of your belongings, but not before making some painfully unfunny jokes. No matter how many times you cut them to pieces with Cloud's Buster Sword, they'll just keep coming back.
Okay, what do you want?
Nothing but our due recompense, that's all. Due recompense! Due recompense!
Due recompense?
No shit for brains, due recompense!
Then we've got the 3 underbosses of Wall Market. Chocobo Sam is a literal carbon copy of Sam Elliott.
This girl, what's she look like?
The dude abides.
Madam M is the hot-tempered Asian massage parlor owner.
It is our pleasure to relieve our patrons of that tension. And what better way to seek relief than through the skilled ministrations of a professional?
And Andrea is the flamboyantly gay nightclub owner. There are quite a few other characters I could mention, but I think you get the picture. Most of these new NPCs really don't add anything interesting or valuable to the game. The only new characters I found remotely interesting were Roche and Johnny. They were over the top and annoying at times, but at least they had some personality and flavor.
You're leaving?
Hush, Tifa. Don't try to stop me. I'm a wanted man in these parts. If I stayed, I'd be a danger to you too.
Most of the interactions you have with these NPCs are extremely shallow, and some are downright baffling. For instance, there is an old man, yes, that is his official name, Old Man, in the slums who asks you to clear out some monsters in the graveyard. He was planning to pay his respects at his late wife's grave, but it's too dangerous now. After you complete the mission, there is an absolutely asinine series of dialogue where Cloud and the old man argue about who is going to return the graveyard key to the child you bought it from at the Moogle Emporium. It ends with him basically telling Cloud to go fuck himself, leaving me to wonder what the hell just happened.
I won't ask you for anything else. I'll take your damned key and give it to the boy. It's downright depressing. What is the world coming to these days?
Like, I bought the graveyard key with actual currency. Why do I need to return it at all? Why is this such a contentious point that undoes the good deed of paying respects to this guy's wife? I guess living in the Midgar slums is tough and takes its toll, turning people into husks of human beings, existing only to pass out boring busy work to passing mercs. Let's talk about side quests. In addition to all the new NPCs, Square Enix also added a bunch of new side quests. There really weren't that many side quests in the original game, so on the face of it, this is really good. I welcome additional side content for FF7 Remake, and I really love playing side quests in RPGs. But there are good side quests, and there are boring, cookie-cutter side quests. Unfortunately, most of Final Fantasy VII Remake's side quests are the latter. Final Fantasy VII Remake's side quests generally fall into two categories. The first is the fetch quest. For these, you go retrieve something or someone for another NPC, then return when you've completed the task and get a reward. Examples are, retrieve a list of plants for a doctor, collect some CDs for a girl trying to cheer up local residents, find some kids who are late for a school lesson, and a quest to find a young girl's missing cats that was giving me flashbacks to an almost identical quest from Fallout 4.
I'm looking for cats.
Have you seen my cat?
I think he's left the vault. I saw him run by me when I got here.
Left the vault? Oh, please bring him back.
Ashes, go home. Aaron misses you.
This sucks.
So that's fetch quests. The second category of side content are the kill quests. I define kill quests as something where killing monsters or general combat is the main objective of the quest. Examples of this include Rat Problem, kill some rats. On the Prowl, kill a wraithhound in the junkyard. Nuisance in the Factory, kill some drakes in a factory. And any of the side quests involving arena combat. There are 26 side quests in the game. Of these 26 quests, 23 of them are either fetch or kill quests. There are 3 minigame quests, one where you smash boxes with your sword, a pull-up competition, and a squat competition, the last of which is lifted directly from the original game. There is almost no gameplay variation or story intrigue for any of these quests. You could skip all of them and literally miss nothing interesting in this game. This is pure filler content, and not even fun or interesting filler, but totally lackluster copy and paste missions. It didn't have to be this way. Many RPGs have excellent side quests with interesting gameplay or story twists that also add something to the larger game world. Let's look at some examples from Baldur's Gate 2 and The Witcher 3. In Baldur's Gate 2, you receive a side quest from a necromancer named Czar. He's looking for a friend named Montaron who recently went missing while infiltrating the base of a faction known as the Harpers. So the goal was initially pretty simple. Get inside the Harper base and find out what happened to Montaron. On the surface, it looks like a pretty basic fetch quest. But there are a couple of additional layers. For starters, this isn't just a random quest giver. Czar and Montaron were optional companions in Baldur's Gate 1. Aside from your childhood friend Imoen, these two were the first companions you could recruit into your party. So many players will already have a history with these characters. Now the Harpers are a tricky organization to deal with. They are very secretive and won't just let you walk into their base. When you talk to the man guarding the door, you can convince him to let you inside in exchange for a favor. He asks you to go eliminate a local mage who's been summoning monsters inside his home and running vile experiments. Once you're done busting some heads, you can finally enter the base and begin your search for Montaron. Unfortunately, you won't find him anywhere on the first floor, and if you head upstairs, you'll be attacked on sight by some kind of ghost guardians. If you ask around downstairs, you can learn that the ghosts won't attack anyone who wears a Harper amulet. So you can either pickpocket an amulet from one of the Harpers, or find one in a desk drawer. Once you have the amulet, you can continue to search upstairs unimpeded. Looking around, you won't find any people, but you will find an aviary that you can interact with. Doing so will prompt you to pick up a bird, and your character will realize that the Harpers have polymorphed Montaron into one of these birds. So you collect Bird Montaron and return to Czar, happy to reunite old friends. Czar thanks you and casts a spell to turn Montaron back into human form. But wait, it's not Montaron. That bird turned out to be a Harper assassin who promptly sticks a blade into Czar, killing him instantly. The whole thing was a setup, not just on you, but the quest giver as well. You were both played, and neither of you saw it coming. Now compare this with any of the fetch quests in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Here's the Baldur's Gate 2 formula. 1. Get quest objective. Infiltrate base and find out what happened to Montaron. 2. Kill a mage to convince the Harpers to let you inside the base. 3. Find out how to deal with the Ghost Guardians on the second floor. 4. Retrieve a Harper amulet. 5. Figure out that Montaron has been transformed into a bird and retrieve him from the aviary. 6. Return to Czar for your reward. 7. Find out that you've both been played by the Harpers. And now for Final Fantasy VII Remake. 1. Get quest objective. Find kids on patrol who are late for a school lesson at the orphanage. 2. Find each kid exactly where the quest giver told you they would be and tell them to return to the orphanage. 3. Return to the orphanage and get your reward. The Baldur's Gate 2 quest is varied, interesting, and unpredictable. The Final Fantasy VII Remake side quest is boring, predictable, and uninspired. You literally know exactly what will happen before you even play it. So which one would you rather play? Even kill quests can be done in a more interesting fashion than Square Enix's approach in this game. Let's take a look at The Witcher 3 for an example. The Witcher 3 has numerous monster hunt contracts that you can find on notice boards throughout the game. Some are really straightforward, but more than a few have some interesting twists and turns. One that really sticks out to me is a contract called the Oxenfurt Drunk. The notice board directs you to a local guardsman who tells you some kind of monster has been killing passersby and leaving their bodies in a gutter. He points you to 2 people you can speak to learn more information about the case, a medic and a victim who survived one of the attacks. Speaking to the victim, you'll not learn much other than she was pretty drunk and that she managed to break free of whatever attacked her before it could kill her. You can also examine the site of the attacks and find some evidence, a bracelet that likely belonged to the attacker since it's too large for a woman's wrist. So now on to the medic. The medic is disinterested in the case and after a bit of hassle will let you examine the bodies for any clues. When you do so, you'll learn all the victims had 2 things in common. They were all drunk at the time of death, and all of them have wounds resembling vampire bite marks. So now we've identified the culprit, a vampire with a predilection for booze. So how do we lure him out? By getting shit-faced and wandering the streets at night, of course.
Our third maid was not and gave it up to any man standing early in the morning.
What's the meaning of this? Such rudeness and vulgarity, young people these days.
All right. Sheesh.
I sense your blood. Come out and fight, bitch.
A fight ensues, and you eventually pursue the vampire to a house where you kill it, before returning to the guard to collect your reward. Now compare this with any of the kill quests in Final Fantasy VII Remake. The Witcher 3 kill quest formula. 1. Get quest objective. Find out what's been killing people in the streets at night. 2. Follow 2 leads, the attack survivor and the coroner. 3. Investigate the crime scene and the victims' bodies. 4. Piece together the clues of the culprit, a vampire who likes booze. 5. Get drunk to lure the vampire out. 6. Fight the vampire to the death. And 7, collect your reward. Here's the Final Fantasy VII kill quest formula. 1. Get quest objective. Go kill some monsters in a specific location. 2. Go to that specific location, finding that the monsters are exactly where you expect them to be. 3. Kill the monsters. 4. Collect your reward. Which one of these quest formulas is more interesting to you? Which one would you rather play? Final Fantasy VII Remake could have had some really interesting side quests, but instead all we got was uninspired filler. It's a huge missed opportunity and a disappointment. Alright, let's talk about your Avalanche companions Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse. In the original game, these were throwaway characters. They existed primarily to round out Avalanche's roster, so it wasn't just Barret and Tifa working to blow up the Midgar reactors, and for some exposition in the early game. All 3 characters died within the first 2 hours. Their deaths didn't have much of an emotional impact in the story because we never really got to know them. In fact, it was a running joke in-game that Cloud never bothered to learn Wedge's name until he was dying. Biggs and Jesse are seen as Cloud ascends to the top of the Sector 7 pillar, but both of them die off-screen when Shinra collapses the pillar at the end of the mission. R.I.P. friends, we hardly knew ye. Since learning that Remake was going to be an extended Midgar section, I was really curious to see how Square Enix handled these 3 characters. They really had an opportunity to add some depth to them and get the audience to connect with them more emotionally. If done right, this could have led to their deaths having more impact than they did in the original game. So would they delve deeper into these characters? Give us a window into their motivations, desires, and fear? No, of course fucking not. This is Square Enix we're talking about here. With the exception of Jesse, no additional backstory or character development is added for these characters. Biggs is still just some random guy. Wedge is fat comic relief. We know nothing about them. Why did they join Avalanche? Is there anything in their personal history that motivated them to fight against Shinra? What do they fear? What do they desire? None of these questions are explored. Wedge is still fat comic relief.
Sure I can't tempt you with some more?
Maybe just a couple slices, Mrs. R.
Wedge!
Hey, I'm doing it for you guys. You don't want me going to work on an empty stomach.
He loves pizza and is the butt of jokes. And I guess he has a bunch of cats now too.
Okay.
Biggs is just some guy. He doesn't really seem to have many skills, not funny, not great in combat. He's just kind of there. He mentioned something about helping at the orphanage occasionally, but we never see this, so he could be totally full of shit. At one point, Biggs and Wedge both say they have no families.
Seeing as we don't have any family of our own, how about you let us be a part of yours for a bit? Spread the wealth.
But what does that mean? It's not explored. Were their families killed? Did they ever know their parents, or were they orphaned at birth? How did this shape their lives in a meaningful way that connects with the story? We don't know because the writers don't give us anything to work with. If you feel any more affinity to these characters, it can probably be attributed to the fact that they have voice acting now.
Hey, it's the lot Jesse was talking about.
Jesse really squashed that dude's head with an ATM machine.
He's serious, Cloud. She'll beat the shit out of us.
3 entire pounds of pseudo wasted. Do you know how long I had to spin that stupid sign? Get off me, psycho! Helicopter, bitch!
Hearing these characters speak and seeing more detailed animations and facial expressions makes them feel more personable and alive than they did in the original game. Additionally, they have far more screen time. Nonetheless, they are still one-dimensional characters. Jesse is the only one who receives any additional character development. It's a mixed bag, but it's welcome. I actually ended up disliking Jesse's character, which is something I didn't expect. She comes across as manipulative and annoying, particularly in her interactions with Cloud. Let's start with her overbearing interest in Cloud. In the original game, it was hinted that Jesse was romantically interested in Cloud. She moves in close to him during a few scenes, wiping dirt off his face after a mission, and asking him to move in next to her as she shows him the city map. It was kind of adorable, but never really explored because, again, Jesse dies so early in the game, and Cloud never shows any signs of reciprocating her interest. In the remake, Jessie comes across as a manipulative and overeager fuck girl willing to go to any lengths to make Cloud hers. For starters, she actively seeks to drive a wedge between Cloud and Tifa. She pries into details about Cloud's feelings about Tifa.
So, you know Tifa, right? It's not really my business, but are you guys close?
And she actively talks about how Tifa isn't down for the cause, but not like her and Cloud. Cloud is one of the few people she can count on.
Tifa will be joining us too, but I don't know. Even a blind man can see her heart's not in it. She was never on board with the bombings, so if it comes down to do or die, if I've got to put my life in someone else's hands, then I'd rather that someone was a professional, like you.
She also tantalizes Cloud with materia and quote-unquote other rewards in exchange for helping her out on quote-unquote missions. Missions which seem designed, at least in part, to get alone time with Cloud. Although Biggs and Wedge end up cock-blocking her during the mission where she steals explosives from Shinra. One point of conflict comes up in Chapter 3. After the chaos of the Sector 8 mission, Tifa proposes that Cloud and her take a night on the town to unwind and reconnect. Cloud agrees, and Tifa excitedly leaves to prepare for the evening. Shortly thereafter, Jessie shows up at Cloud's apartment and proposes a job for him, one that would take place that same night.
Welcome home, honey. Took your sweet time.
When I was playing this, my heart sank. I've always been on Team Tifa, so I didn't want Cloud missing a date with her to do some random mission for Jessie, a character who I was rapidly growing to dislike. But it's a main story mission. You have to do it. I was really bummed, and I was expecting a sad scene to happen later, with Tifa's feelings hurt that Cloud stood her up. But what happens? Absolutely nothing. Tifa never mentions the date again and doesn't seem at all upset about it. And the story just moves on as if they never planned to hang out to begin with. It's like the writers completely forgot they put this in the game. It was just bizarre.
I'm really glad to have you back, Cloud. Really glad.
Anyhow, onto the Chapter 4 mission called Mad Dash. This chapter is the main place where we get character development for Jessie. And honestly, some of it is pretty good. Jessie's parents live in Shinra Company housing in Upper Midgar. Jessie's dad was a Shinra employee, but he experienced Mako poisoning and has since been rendered comatose. He spends all his days in a vegetative state in bed at home. We see this firsthand during Jessie's mission. The plan is to use her father's employee badge to access a Shinra storage facility and steal some explosives to use in Avalanche's planned bombing of the Sector 5 reactor. Jessie enters her parents' home with Wedge and Biggs so that they can distract her mother while Cloud sneaks into the house and takes the badge. When we go inside, we see the state her father is in, and it really starts to sink in why Jessie became disillusioned and angry with Shinra. The rapid decline of her father's health pushed her to evaluate Shinra's impact on people, as well as her own place in the world. She became radicalized and joined Avalanche to fight back against Shinra. This writing is actually really compelling. It shows us what could have been done with Biggs and Wedge as well. If it weren't for Jessie's manipulative and desperate to fuck Cloud aspects that Square Enix added to her character, I might have ended up liking her more. During the motorcycle sequence, Jessie presses herself up against Cloud repeatedly and makes suggestive comments, something that Cloud is visibly uncomfortable with. If you're struggling through the mission, Jessie will start complaining and Cloud just tells her to shut up, which I got a laugh out of.
I think we've bitten off more than we can chew! What do we do?
Shut up!
At the end of the mission, Cloud heads back to Jessie's house to collect his payment. Here she openly propositions him to come back over tomorrow night.
Okay, I get it. Mind letting me breathe?
Depends. Mind coming over tomorrow night? My roommates should all be out for a while.
Are you seriously that desperate? Just let go already.
Cloud is not thrilled by this at all, but the player is given a choice to give a non-committal response or outright reject her.
Not happening.
Sorry. Little too in your face? I'll just have to change it up then.
While I didn't like Jessie in Remake, at least they developed her character more. Nonetheless, the character writing in Final Fantasy VII Remake still pales in comparison to its predecessor. Each of the playable characters in the original game has a complex backstory that feeds into their motivations. We understand what made them who they are and why they fight. Let's take Barret, for example. In the beginning of the game, we see that he is very passionate about fighting against Shinra and saving the planet by any means necessary. But we really don't know what motivates these ideals until we reach a town called North Coral. The residents here are living in makeshift housing along the train tracks. It's clear they've been displaced, and they are hostile to Barret when they see him. The group is obviously confused by this. Why would these people hate him? You see, Barret used to live in a coal mining town called Coral. Shinra approached the residents to cut a deal which would allow them to build a Mako reactor in town. In exchange, Shinra would ensure the residents would be supported financially. Most of the townsfolk supported the deal, including Barret. Only Barret's friend Dine was opposed. But Shinra betrayed the residents and razed the town after the reactor was completed. Many of the residents perished, including Barret's wife Myrna. Barret and Dine were out of town at the start of the attack. They rushed back to defend the town, but were attacked by Shinra soldiers. Barret gets his arm shot off, and Dine falls off the cliff to his death. Barret goes on to adopt Dine's daughter Marlene and gets a gun grafted onto his right arm so he can take the fight to Shinra. This gives him purpose and allows him to move past his depression for what happened in the past. There's more that I could go into here, like the fact that Dine actually survived and also got a gun grafted into his arm, but instead of becoming radicalized, he's just become bitter and nihilistic. And he goes on to fight Barret 1v1 before committing suicide. But I think you get the picture. You see how deep this character can get with only a couple of scenes of exposition and backstory? Why couldn't Square Enix do this with the rest of the Avalanche crew? The writers couldn't be bothered to flesh out Biggs or Wedge, but they did create a backstory for the doorman at Don Corneo's mansion, as if anybody gave a flying fuck about that. In a section that's clearly designed to pad out the game, we help the doorman Leslie pursue revenge for his lost lover, pitting us against Don Corneo once again. But we'll get to that later. I've also got a lot more to say about Wedge in the next section, so let's get on with it. Shinra dropping the upper plate on the Sector 7 slums was a turning point in the original Final Fantasy VII. Cloud and friends race to the scene to find a fight between Avalanche and Shinra is already underway. Wedge falls off the pillar, plummeting several stories to his death. Biggs and Jesse can also be seen, apparently injured, as you ascend up the pillar. When Cloud reaches the top, it's too late. Shinra has already activated the detonators. During the chaos, they also managed to kidnap Aerith. Cloud, Barret, and Tifa narrowly escape death by swinging off the pillar as the bomb explodes. The plate drops and crushes all the people below. Casualties are tremendous. This was a devastating blow to the group, and the first moment in the game where they suffered a full defeat. Not only were their friends dead, but many other people in the slums and the upper plate of Sector 7 perished as well. Tifa is left wondering if their actions led to the deaths of so many people. Are you saying it's our fault? Because Avalanche was here? Innocent people lost their lives because of us? Barret points the finger back at Shinra. It's clear at this point that Shinra isn't fucking around, and is willing to use any means necessary to crush Avalanche's opposition to their plans. The only beacon of hope is the fact that Aerith managed to get Barret's adopted daughter Marlene to safety before Sector 7 was destroyed. Final Fantasy VII Remake takes a different approach to this section of the story. The Sector 7 plate drop is also a turning point in the new game. It's where the quality of the writing gets noticeably worse and continues to decline for the rest of the game. Let's take a look at how these events play out. Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa arrive on the scene to find Shinra and Avalanche already fighting. Wedge falls off the pillar, firing a grappling hook as he plummets. This stops his descent, but only temporarily as the line breaks, causing him to fall to his death.
Don't worry, I'll patch him up.
Or wait, I guess not. Yeah, he survives that drop. I guess Square Enix is really doubling down on fall damage being meaningless in all Final Fantasy games, including the original Final Fantasy VII, to be honest. Aerith and Tifa stay behind with Wedge, while Cloud heads up the pillar to join the fight. he finds Biggs badly wounded, seemingly dying. Biggs rambles on about the Sector 5 orphanage before going unconscious. Cloud's like, "See ya," and continues climbing higher. Back on the ground, Tifa decides to head up the pillar as well, while Aerith and Wedge go to find Marlene and start organizing an evacuation of the Sector 7 slums. The evacuation is bizarre. There's very little sense of urgency as residents slowly start leaving the area. I mean, there are people literally just hanging out and chatting on the street as debris falls around them. Some are lightly jogging out of the neighborhood. 2 helicopters collide, sending one of them crashing to the ground below. And Aerith just stands there watching as it slowly falls towards her, exploding 10 feet in front of her face and knocking her to the ground. Aerith gets back up and finds a girl who is not Marlene and slowly carries her to safety. Like, no rush at all. The plate could drop at any minute and I still have to save Marlene, but I'm just going to take my time and enjoy the scenery.
You better hurry up, bruh.
Aerith hands the girl over to her father and heads back out to find Marlene. She walks past the same helicopter, which explodes and knocks her down for the second time. What the fuck is this game? Aerith gets up again and finally makes it to 7th Heaven, where she finds Marlene hiding under the bar. They have a full 5-minute conversation. Again, where's the urgency? Before finally heading towards the doors. But uh-oh, it's Sang from the Shinra Turks.
How about we make a deal?
Back on the pillar, Cloud and Tifa are dodging helicopter fire from Reno. They eventually find Jessie, who chucks a grenade at a chopper, mortally wounding herself in the process. When Cloud and Tifa reach her, she's trapped under a pile of rubble. Jessie's death scene stretches out for nearly 4 minutes. This is supposed to be an emotional moment, but Jessie was such an annoying character in this game that I didn't feel any sort of way. Remember how I said Square Enix had an opportunity to make the deaths of Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie have a real emotional impact? Yeah, well, they botched it. Wedge survived the fall off the pillar. Biggs just kind of slipped out of consciousness and we didn't see him again. Jessie's death scene was supposed to be emotional, but it wasn't, at least for me. Cloud didn't even seem to care. He was just like, "Okay, bye." The whole sequence fell flat. Anyhow, let's continue. Cloud and Tifa join Barret at the top of the pillar. A boss fight ensues with Reno and Rude. It's a good fight, and the highlight of this chapter so far. Afterwards, ghosts show up to prevent Barret and Cloud from killing Reno. Rude initiates the quote-unquote plate separation, which, why is that a feature of this architecture again? Anyway, Tifa does a damsel in distress thing, which conveniently allows Reno and Rude to escape. And Barret goes all, "Say hello to my little friend," on the console. The screen on the console is still intact. I guess it was a bulletproof display. And Sang Zoom calls the gang to let them know he's kidnapped Aerith and that there is nothing they can do to stop the plate from dropping on the slums. Barret, Tifa, and Cloud continue to stand around for a full minute while alarms blare and debris falls before finally deciding, oh hey, we should probably get out of here. They zipline to safety as the plate separates and crashes into the slums below. Wedge wrangles with his cats while a giant piece of debris falls on his head while he goes, huh? And President Shinra surveys the damage. Other than Jessie and maybe Biggs, as far as I can tell, no one in the Sector 7 slums actually died from the plate drop. Instead, the residents all get together singing, we shall not be moved." Where's the drama, the tension, the conflict, the stakes? It's all been stripped out of this game. Nothing matters. No matter how bad things get, no one ever dies, except for the really, really annoying ones.
Welcome home, honey. Took your sweet time.
The Sector 7 plate drop was one of the biggest oh shit moments in the early part of the original game, but Square Enix totally undercut the drama in Final Fantasy VII Remake. But Wedge died too. What about Wedge? Oh, wait until you hear this shit. After checking up on Marlene and getting some exposition about Aerith from Elmira, Tifa, Cloud, and Barret head back to the Sector 7 slums. Cloud notices one of Wedge's cats in the street, and the gang follows it to a gigantic hole in the ground outside Wedge's apartment. Turns out, there was some kind of underground facility underneath Wedge's place, and the ground opened up in a deus ex machina to save Wedge from the falling debris. The gang descends into the facility, down several flights of stairs, to find Wedge lying unconscious in the middle of the floor. So, what even happened here? Did the ground open up just before the massive debris hit him? And then he proceeded to what? Roll down several flights of stairs? Around several bends? Before passing out on the floor? Or did he crawl down those stairs and then pass out? If he could crawl, why wouldn't he try to get back to the surface? This whole thing makes no goddamn sense. But it gets better. While everyone is standing around, the floor collapses underneath them. Everyone goes falling through the floor. And get this, even though all four of them were relatively close together, each individual falls into a completely different part of the facility. How does this happen? Doesn't matter. We gotta pad the runtime of this game, baby. Time to shoot some rocks.
Suck on this!
This is laughably bad content. Anyhow, eventually everyone is reunited and they bring Wedge to Aerith's house instead of, a doctor. They tuck him into bed, which I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to do with someone who's had a concussion. You have to keep them awake and monitor them to make sure their brain doesn't swell and kill them in their sleep. But the writers aren't even trying to make any of this make sense, so whatever. After playing this, I was completely baffled. Like, why did Square Enix even bother keeping Wedge alive? So they can keep making fat jokes in upcoming games? It's not like they bothered developing his character during this game. He also didn't contribute to the plot in any meaningful way. But hey, he's still alive now. It's pointless. Anyhow, let's keep this bad boy moving. With Wedge safely tucked into bed and totally not dead, now it's time to rescue Aerith. With Sector 7 destroyed and Aerith kidnapped, the gang has to find a way to infiltrate Shinra HQ and save her. They obviously can't just hop on a train or ride the highway to Upper Midgar at this point. Here it's worth drawing parallels again to how this plays out in the original game. After finding Marlene safe at Aerith's house, the gang decides to head to Wall Market to find a way to reach Shinra HQ. The player is encouraged to explore and ask around to find the answer. First, a group of children will show you to a wire leading up over the wall. Barret reckons that the gang could climb this to reach Upper Midgar. You will also need to acquire some batteries to power up a few contraptions that will allow Cloud to climb higher. And you can get this information by talking to NPCs in the area and learning that a weapon shop owner has some salvage batteries for sale. What's most relevant here is that Cloud and the gang can solve their own problems. Sure, they may need to ask around and do some investigative work to find a way forward, but they come across as relatively competent and independent. So how does this section play out in Final Fantasy VII Remake? After finding out Marlene and Wedge are both safe, Tifa makes the brilliant suggestion to go to Don Corneo.
You know another way up?
No, but I think I know someone who might.
You mean Corneo?
And by brilliant, I mean absolutely idiotic. Why would Don Corneo have any incentive to help them? It makes literally no sense. In fact, not only is Corneo unlikely to help them, he's actively hunting Barret in this chapter. There is a side quest where you confront Corneo's goons and fight a Master Toneberry, who is an endgame enemy from the original FF7. The game rationalizes this by having NPCs tell us it's impossible to get to Upper Midgar.
I was hoping you knew a way we could get topside.
Sorry, but it's not possible.
We're looking for a way topside. No one?
Good luck with that. Security's so tight these days that not even a gnat could slip through.
When an NPC in a video game tells you something is impossible, it's usually not true. So I'm not buying this whole line of thinking that Don Corneo is the only one who can help Cloud and the gang reach Shinra HQ. In fact, future events in this game will prove just how ridiculous this whole sequence is, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Do we really have to deal with Corneo again?
You're the one who suggested it! Also, this whole Corneo is the only one who can help us shtick just makes Cloud, Tifa, and Barret look helpless and incompetent. What happened to the characters who went up against impossible odds to save the planet? You're telling me they can't figure out how to get to another part of town without getting support from a local mob boss who also happens to be their enemy? But anyhow, this is where the story's going, so let's roll with it. When the gang gets to Corneo's mansion, it's completely empty except for the doorman Leslie. After a short conversation, Leslie agrees to help Cloud get to Upper Midgar in exchange for helping Leslie get revenge on Don Corneo. You see, turns out Leslie had a lover who Don Corneo picked as his bride and blah blah blah. I don't give a shit. Why is this guy getting a backstory instead of Biggs and Wedge? And why is any of this happening at all? This chapter feels like another padding segment meant to draw out the length of the game rather than deliver us with compelling narrative and gameplay.
No! Wait! We gotta catch him! Huh? He took the key to the door! Without it, we're screwed!
Why has this whole thing gotta be such a big pain in the ass?
So you head down into the sewers again. Leslie makes the worst assassination attempt ever. Corneo escapes, and you fight the Abzu boss again, and then you finally leave, and Leslie just gives you grappling guns to climb over the ruins.
Grappling guns. You can practically fly with the souped-up motors on these babies.
That's it? Grappling guns? Okay, so why didn't we just go to the ruins in the first place? Honestly, could nobody else think of that idea? The whole premise of going to Corneo for help was so asinine. He didn't even help us in the end. Leslie did. But what if Leslie wasn't there when we showed up? The whole thing hinged on a ridiculous premise and then a chance encounter. It wasn't even fun from a gameplay perspective because we just have to replay content we've already seen, and a sewer level no less. Side note, I don't know why developers are obsessed with putting sewer levels in RPGs. Sewer levels are always the shittiest levels in any video game. No pun intended. On top of this, we have to hear about a love story involving characters we don't know or care about at all. One of them is literally faceless. You never see their face. Again, this whole chapter feels like pointless filler, and honestly, it's weak sauce. I've got nothing else to say about chapters 14 and 15, so let's move on. At this point, we've only got 3 chapters left in the game. Chapter 16's events are largely the same as the original game, at least in broad strokes. However, chapters 17 and 18 deviate massively from the original plot and offer us some of the worst writing in the entire game. Dog shit is the first word that comes to mind. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let's bring you up to speed. After reaching the Shinra HQ, Cloud, Barret, and Tifa head inside to find Aerith. They proceed up through the building, eavesdrop on Shinra leadership, speak to the mayor of Midgar, and secure enough keycards to eventually reach Hojo's laboratory. After a quick boss fight, the gang rescues Aerith and links up with Red 13, who Aerith pacifies by saying, "Good doggo," and patting him on the head. Cloud stumbles down the corridor and collapses after having a vision of Genova's body in a tank. Chapter 17 kicks off with Cloud waking up in Hojo's lab. This is the room where Aerith lived as a child with her mother Ifalna before both of them escaped Shinra captivity. Aerith tells us a bit about her experience as an ancient, and Barret proposes a new plan.
Y'all take Aerith and get the hell out of here. Me, I'm gonna go bust some Shinra heads.
Barret, wait. You can't do that.
Oh, great! These assholes again! Probably some Shinra science experiment.
Whispers. Perhaps best described as arbiters of fate. They are drawn to those who attempt to alter destiny's course and ensure they do not.
And here's the first time we get an explanation for the weird ghost things we've seen at various points throughout the game. He somehow learned all this when Aerith touched his head in Chapter 16. Apparently Aerith can communicate with the Whispers and somehow see into the future. She tells us that Shinra isn't the real enemy and that there is a bigger threat, though she's reluctant to share too many details because I guess it would be spoilers? But the whole crew just rolls with it. Yeah, fate ghosts. Then Wedge shows up. Remember Wedge?
Hey guys, long time no see!
Remember how it was impossible to reach Shinra HQ from Wall Market?
Sorry, but it's not possible.
Yeah, well, Wedge just got here, all by himself. Yeah, he's also fine now. I guess his fat ass just needed a plate of food to recover from all the massive head trauma he experienced in the last 24 hours. Oh, and by the way, Avalanche has a helicopter.
Find a way to the roof. An avalanche chopper will come to extract you.
HQ's bailing us out.
And they're sending it to pick everyone up on the roof of Shinra HQ. Are you out of your fucking mind? If Avalanche had access to a helicopter this whole time, then why the fuck did we need to play through a recycled sewer chapter, a pointless insufferable love story, and deal with Don Corneo again? Square Enix is throwing so many plot holes at us that it's getting hard to keep up. After this, we're treated to over an hour of pure filler. The gang is trying to escape Hojo's lab, fighting random enemies, and moving test pods. The only significant thing that happens is this brief encounter with Sephiroth.
Embrace me. A touching reunion.
Eventually, the gang reaches President Shinra's office to find him dangling off the edge of the building. Barret almost kills him, but Tifa and Aerith protest, so he saves his life instead. Then he demands that President Shinra go on TV and tell the people the truth about Sector 7 and Avalanche. But Shinra just goes to his desk and draws a gun on Barret instead. Like, come on, Barret. Did you really think that was gonna work? Shinra does an evil villain speech, and then right as he's about to pull the trigger, he gets murked by Sephiroth. Then this happens.
You son of a bitch!
Barret!
Sephiroth turns out not to be the Sephiroth, but a clone, and he transforms into a boss called Genova Dreamweaver. After the boss fight, Barret is revived in a literal Deus Ex Machina.
Barret, are you hurt?
Don't think so.
This death was not the one ordained for you by fate.
Thanks.
Yeah, the Whispers just bring him back to life. I wonder what the writers were thinking with this one. Do they expect the audience to take this stuff seriously? It's a literal biblical Lazarus moment, and everyone just rolls with it, like, oh, you silly Whispers. The Deus Ex Machina is one of the lamest plot contrivances in story writing. It's when a character is saved from a seemingly inescapable problem, i.e. getting a sword rammed through his chest, by an equally unlikely force. Fandor has an excellent video explaining the pitfalls of Deus Ex Machina, which I'll link in the description if you're interested in exploring the topic further. Final Fantasy VII Remake commits the sin of Deus Ex Machina multiple times, for Wedge in chapters 12 and 13, and for Barret here. It's just lazy, bad writing, which is really disappointing considering how well written most of the original game was. Moving on, Cloud runs outside to confront the Sephiroth clone Marco, who jumps off the building. Shinra blows up the Avalanche helicopter, which we should have used earlier to skip the rehashed sewer level, but whatever. Cloud fights President Rufus, and Barret and Aerith fight the elevator robot boss. Wedge is still in the building. Remember Wedge? And he gets swarmed by Whispers, who are trying to give him a Final Destination-style death.
I'm sorry, Cloud. Just tell me that I made a difference.
Come on, man. I'm not falling for this shit. Y'all already did the cut-to-black death fake-out for Wedge earlier in the game. The death fake-out jump cut is like a jump scare in horror movies. You can really only use it once effectively. After that, the audience won't be fooled by it again. This section ends in a pretty similar fashion to the original game. The gang steals a motorcycle and a truck to escape Shinra HQ via the highway, fighting off goons and motor boss along the way. It's when Cloud and crew reach the end of the highway that things start to get really wacky. Chapter 18, the last chapter of the game, is where Final Fantasy VII Remake goes way off the deep end. It's where the characters stop acting with their own thoughts and motivations and transform into mere conduits to deliver a bizarre meta-narrative on creative freedom in video game remakes. As early as 2015, Square Enix shared their intention to alter the story in Final Fantasy VII Remake. In an interview with Dengeki Online, game director Tetsuo Nomura discussed the series' new episodic nature and stated, "In addition to digging deeper into the episodes, we also have gimmicks. The users who played the original version know the story from the beginning to the end, including the important parts. I hope that such people will be surprised again." In the same interview, producer Yoshinori Kitase said, "I don't want to trace the nostalgia and end up with a one-to-one remake. I want to make the fans of the original version excited again. With that in mind, the story is readjusted." Side note, these quotes were both translated from Japanese to English with Google Translate, so if they sound a little wonky, that's probably why. Point is, they didn't want to simply retell the classic Final Fantasy VII story. They wanted to rewrite it and flex their own creative muscles with an original narrative, capable of reaching new fans and surprising OG fans. This context is important because otherwise the events of Chapter 18 are kind of baffling to play through. The Whispers of Fate we've seen throughout the game were trying to steer the story along its original tracks. Cloud and the gang pushing back against the Whispers opened up deviations from Fate, i.e. deviations from the 1997 version of Final Fantasy VII. This is the plot explanation for the writer's desire to change the story. I understand the desire of the developers to craft a new story. It's their intellectual property and their creative prerogative to do so. But when you're working with a beloved story like Final Fantasy VII, with an established canon and many die-hard fans, you run the risk of alienating those folks when you make drastic changes to the plot. This is especially true if the new content is of a lower quality than the original, which is the case in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Look, writing good stories is difficult. Think of how many bad stories you've encountered in movies you've seen, books you've read, or games you've played. The original Final Fantasy VII was a rare example of a compelling video game plot, especially for the 1990s, when very few games emphasized storytelling. To see it turn into this convoluted mess is kind of painful. So let's walk through the events of Chapter 18 and deconstruct what they mean, both for this game and the future of the Final Fantasy VII franchise. After Cloud and the gang escape from Shinra troops and defeat Motor Boss, they find Sephiroth at the end of the highway. Aerith tells him that everything about him is wrong. Sephiroth speaks about unmaking the world, and Cloud threatens him in return. The Whispers fan out from Shinra HQ, and we are given a flashback vision.
we drag our asses all this way. And this is the welcome we get.
This is Zack. I wonder what first-time players of the game will experience at this point, because this character is presented with absolutely no context. You see, Zack was a member of Soldier who was with Cloud in Nibelheim when Sephiroth snapped and razed the town 5 years ago. In the aftermath, Cloud and Zack were captured by Shinra and turned into unwilling experimental test subjects for the Jenova project. One day, Zack managed to help Cloud escape, and they made a run for Midgar. Unfortunately, Shinra troops caught up with them outside the city and killed Zack. They left Cloud alone because he was so out of it at the time that they assumed he would die as well. But Cloud survived, picked up Zack's sword and gear, and stumbled into Midgar in a haze. Tifa eventually found him at the train station and recruited him to help Avalanche with the Sector 8 reactor job that kicked off the game. This vision we are presented with in Remake is the scene where Zack was killed by Shinra troops in the original game. But again, it's presented completely out of context. Without having played the original game, new players will likely have no idea who this guy is or how he connects to the plot.
Boy, oh boy. The price of freedom is steep.
Sephiroth cuts a hole in the fabric of space and says, "I'm waiting, Cloud," before walking through. Cloud steps forward to give chase, but Aerith grabs him by the arm and says, "This is the point of no return." She casts a spell and says, "Destiny's Crossroad."
And why did you stop me?
I'm not really sure. What will we find on the other side?
Freedom. Boundless, terrifying freedom. Like a great, never-ending sky.
What freedom does Aerith speak of? Creative freedom for the writers. This isn't Aerith the character speaking to us, it's Aerith as a mouthpiece for the desire of the writers. It's also worth mentioning that at this point in the game, we haven't really learned much of Sephiroth's motives. We just know that Cloud reacts very strongly to seeing him, and we've seen flashes of the past and future from the original FF7. A new player will recognize Sephiroth as an antagonist because of how he's presented, but they won't really understand why. So after talking about boundless, terrifying freedom, Aerith then reveals that Sephiroth is the greatest threat to the planet.
There's no greater threat to the planet than him. Sephiroth has to be stopped. He has to be.
She doesn't say why or what he intends, so let's compare this to how we learned about Sephiroth's motives in 1997. In the original game, Sephiroth's motives and backstory are delivered through flashbacks and direct encounters with him. The writers show us what he plans to do and why we need to stop him. After leaving Midgar, Cloud retells the events of 5 years earlier in Nibelheim, where Sephiroth lost his mind after learning he was the product of a Shinra experiment called the Jenova Project. Sephiroth spent days researching the project, the legacy of the Cetra and Jenova, coming to the conclusion that it was his destiny to reclaim the planet for Jenova by force. He burns down the entire town and kills many, including Cloud's mother and Tifa's father. This gives us a personal connection to pursuing Sephiroth through Cloud and Tifa. Later, when we encounter Sephiroth in the Temple of the Ancients, we learn how he plans to harness the power of the black materia to summon a meteor to smash into the planet. The destruction will cause the planet to marshal a massive amount of energy to heal itself, and Sephiroth will then harness that power to become a god. In the remake, Aerith's just like, he's the biggest threat and we must stop him. The writers are just telling us he's a threat, not showing us through actual exposition and gameplay. I think they should have put the Nibelheim flashback in Chapter 17 and cut that stupid filler section. That would have at least conveyed to the audience how dangerous Sephiroth had become and shown us Cloud's motives to stop him, not to mention Tifa's and also Aerith's. Okay, so we know Sephiroth is the biggest threat now. So how does Aerith suggest we defeat him? By defying fate.
I'm asking you to help me. I know that together we can do this. But if we do, we'll be changing more than fate itself. If we succeed, if we win, we'll be changing ourselves.
Why, though? It's been shown that Aerith can tap into the planet's memory and see glimpses of the future. So does she know that Cloud and the crew defeat Sephiroth and save the planet in the original? If so, it seems like a pretty big risk to deviate from the path of fate. What if you end up losing it all instead? Why else could Aerith want them to deviate from fate? Well, the victory in the original game was not a total victory by any means. The meteor doesn't destroy the planet, but it does destroy Midgar. Even though humanity survives, many lives are lost. Oh, and Aerith also dies in the original game. So is Aerith just trying to save her own skin? Is that why she won't reveal all of her cards to the rest of the crew? Is that why she seems to hesitate when Cloud starts to go after Sephiroth? Would the Aerith that we know and love be capable of something as selfish as risking the fate of the world for a chance to save her own life? It doesn't seem in line with her character at all. Again, this is what I mean when I say the characters cease to act on their own motivations and become conduits for a bizarre meta-narrative.
This isn't the way it's supposed to be.
It's not the characters who are motivated to deviate from the path of fate. It's the writers of this game. At this point, Cloud agrees that Sephiroth has to be stopped, and you move through the portal. Before you do, the game shows you this message, which I found hilarious. When you cross the barrier of whispers, strange and terrible things may be waiting on the other side. Yeah, Square Enix, you're not kidding.
Never tried to challenge destiny.
This could well be her last line of defense. It won't be easy.
Other than Aerith, do any of the characters even know why they're doing this? Especially someone like Barret. The Whispers literally saved his life in the previous chapter.
Thanks. Wouldn't be the first time I spit in Destiny's eye.
Not one of them is like, hold on, Aerith, what is Sephiroth planning? And how will deviating from fate help us stop Sephiroth? They all just roll with it. Once inside the void, the gang will be pulled up into the sky and do a bit of platforming before confronting King Daddy Whisper, aka the Harbinger of Fate, or as Barret calls it, Ultra Big Boy.
In that case, Ultra Big Boy is all mine.
This whole section is visually impressive, but I can't help but continue asking myself, why are they fighting the Harbinger of Fate to begin with? How is this going to lead to Sephiroth's defeat? In any case, eventually the gang does destroy Ultra Big Boy and gets transported to some kind of white light realm. Cloud is like, where are we? And Aerith is still on her cryptic bullshit. Sephiroth beckons to Cloud again.
I'm waiting, Cloud.
A gigantic explosion. Big-ass meteor. Sephiroth rolls in and throws the Shinra HQ building at Cloud, sending the whole crew flying through the air. Cloud cuts debris with his big-ass sword and sticks the landing, taking 0 fall damage. Cue up One-Winged Angel. This is my shit!
Let's finish this.
This fight is undeniably awesome. The boss battles in this game are what really stand out and shine. It's just that the context of the story writing really drags things down. Eventually, with some help from Cloud's friends, Sephiroth is defeated, at least for now. But he pulls Cloud up into space to have a little chat. He invites Cloud to join him in defying destiny, and Cloud refuses.
Never.
The swordplay is a stalemate, probably because Cloud hasn't learned Omnislash yet. Cue the cinematic fade to black. Let's do a quick rundown of the final events of the game. Rufus takes over as president of Shinra. Hojo laughs maniacally in his lab. Zack is shown alive, having defeated Shinra troops outside Midgar.
Wait, was that all of them?
The slums folk are alive and well, and the camera pans into the orphanage, showing Biggs alive in bed. It's also implied that Jessie is alive, since her bandana and gloves are on the desk. Barret reaches out to Marlene, and Cloud laments that Sephiroth got away.
Sephiroth. Long as he's still out there. I
thought you beat him.
We can. We will. Count me in.
If it's to be a hunt, you could use a nose like mine.
I'm in too. Bastard wants to destroy the whole planet, doesn't he? An enemy of hers is an enemy of Avalanche.
This flashback vision of Zack lugging Cloud towards Midgar merges with the current moment right before the credits roll. Are these alternate timelines, or is this a representation of what exists currently in this timeline? In other words, did defeating the Whispers alter the past, thus bringing certain characters back to life, as well as paving the way for a new future? Or are these visions simply flashes of other possible realities or different timelines? Final Fantasy VII Remake posed lots of questions, but offered little in the way of answers. Only time will tell where Square Enix decides to take the story next. Let's bring this bad boy home. Despite the flashiness of the graphics, music, and combat, Square Enix really dropped the ball with Final Fantasy VII Remake. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed much of the gameplay, but this new story? It ain't it, bro. The writers absolutely butchered the story with stupid, nonsensical, and asinine rewrites to the game's plot. I can appreciate what Square Enix was attempting with this game, but not the execution. They did not stick the landing. The writers simply failed to bring together a cohesive narrative and introduced a plethora of new plot holes and silly contrived events along the way. Also, this is the Final Fantasy VII Rainbows and Puppies edition. Many of the most dramatic or painful moments from the original game were stripped out or sanitized in the remake. The people of Sector 7 were saved. Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie were saved as well. At least that's how it seems in the final cinematics. Hell, even Zack was brought back to life. Barely anyone suffered any real hardships or negative consequences in the end. It's a Pollyanna story. There are some great moments in this game. Unfortunately, the overall experience is dragged down by excessive filler, poor character development, lackluster side quests, nonsensical plot devices, and overall bad writing. After receiving some fan backlash over the game's ending, Square Enix put out a statement on the future of the franchise. Producer Yoshinori Kitase said, "We're not drastically changing the story and making it into something completely different than the original. Even though it's a remake, please assume the story of FF7 will continue as FF7 always has." But here's the thing though, I don't believe this. They've already made significant changes to the story, and why go to all that trouble of writing about the Whispers and defying fate if they're planning to keep the story intact?
Boundless, terrifying freedom.
It's all very suspect to me. Here's what I predict for the future of the FF7 Remake series. I think they're going to go in a completely different direction in future games. The next one will be even further removed from the plot of the original Final Fantasy VII than this installment was. I think Aerith is not going to die this time around. I also think Biggs, Wedge, Jesse, and Zack will all be alive in the next game, though who the fuck knows what role they will play. I'll withhold judgment until I've played the next game. It's entirely possible they'll create an original story that is compelling. But based on the new writing I've seen in FF7 Remake, I highly doubt it, because this one is hot garbage. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thanks for watching. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my take on Final Fantasy VII Remake. I had a lot of fun putting this together. I'm planning to do some more long-form videos like this one on my channel. I'm working on a retrospective video about the original Final Fantasy VII right now. So if you're interested, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Stay safe out there, folks, and have a great day. This has been Big Dan Gaming. Peace.
You do know how to drive, right?
Soldiers need mandatory training.
I think we've bitten off more than we can chew. What do we do?
Shut up.